Hello, this is Cindy from Cindy's Library, and today I am starting a new segment which I hope will be a regular one, which will be Tolkien Talk, as in J.R.R. Tolkien. You may already be familiar with The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. You may even have heard of the Silmarillion, and yes, I would like to touch on all of those eventually. But this segment is specifically going to be for Tolkien's lesser known works, because Tolkien wrote a lot, and it should be celebrated, especially the things that are not so well known, because they have value and importance of their own. And so today I would like to start with Mr. Bliss. Now, Mr. Bliss is a story that Tolkien wrote and illustrated for his children when they were young. Yes, Tolkien was not only an author, but he also was an amateur artist of some skill. In fact, he illustrated The Hobbit, if you did not know that. And he illustrated this book, Mr. Bliss, too. And I'm going to include several photos of a few of the illustrations to give you a sample of his style, which is absolutely charming. So what is Mr. Bliss about? Mr. Bliss is about a man who lives in a lovely house at the top of the hill. And one day he decides he wants to buy a car, and so he does. A pity that Mr. Bliss is not a good driver. A pity that Mr. Bliss keeps running into his neighbors. A pity that Mr. Bliss runs into 3 bears in the woods. I won't spoil the ending, but it is absolutely delightful. And so, some notes to make about Mr. Bliss. It was not published during Tolkien's lifetime, and although he did try several times to have it published, and so it may not be as polished as it would have been if it had been published during his lifetime. But it is still quite a charming little tale, and I quite enjoyed it. I guess you could say the thing it has to recommend for it the most would be its charm, and that's okay. That is sufficient reason to justify any book if you find it charming and it puts a smile on your face, as it did me. So this would be a great book to introduce to children. If you are a Tolkien fan but haven't read this book yet, well, you might want to check it out, especially if you enjoyed The Hobbit or the Father Christmas letters. Now, several scholarly notes about Mr. Bliss, things to notice. One is the bears. Tolkien used bears in several places in his works over the years. He used them here in Mr. Bliss. You may remember Beorn from The Hobbit, the man who was a bear. You're not sure whether he is a man or a bear. He can turn into either one. And that has analogs in Beowulf, which we will touch on when we get to Tolkien's translation of Beowulf. And he also has analogs in Norse mythology. Tolkien's children apparently loved teddy bears, especially his youngest daughter Priscilla, and so it's no surprise that some of his stories for them include bears. Another story that he made for them that includes bears is the Father Christmas letters, which we will be talking about in December, because of course you have to talk about the Father Christmas letters when it's December and Christmas is coming. And there we will meet, among many other characters, the North Polar Bear, who is hilarious. Look forward to finding out more about him. Another note is that apparently Tolkien owned at least one car in his life, but he quickly seemed to dislike the combustion engine, and that may be just as well, since apparently he wasn't that good of a driver. Can't necessarily prove it, but it's not impossible that the car part of Mr. Bliss was a little too close to life for Tolkien. And then the third thing I wanted to point out from Mr. Bliss are the names. No, Tolkien is not inventing any languages or even names for Mr. Bliss, but Tolkien is a philologist with a love of language and a love of names and their meanings, and so he plays around with names in Mr. Bliss. Now, even Mr. Bliss has some significance. You've got Mr. Day and Mrs. Knight, the three bears' names. They are related to each other. And the four brothers who he goes to visit, their names have significance as well and are related to each other. So, no, even in a work like Mr. Bliss, it appears that you can't get Tolkien away from playing around with names, and that's okay. Anyway, so this is the end of our first Talk Tolkien segment. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any suggestions about which of Tolkien's unknown works you'd like me to go over next. Let me know if you've read Mr. Bliss and what you think of it. That would be wonderful. Till next time, I hope you keep safe, and as always, happy reading!